Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our broadcast today. This is an interview that I conducted with Marcia Montenegro. She is the founder of Christian Answers for the New Age. She's a former astrologer and former New Age practitioner who is now a Christian, warning other people of faith about the dangers of the New Age movement, and also reaching out to people who are currently in the New Age movement to tell them about Jesus Christ and the love that he has for them. This is a great interview, and I hope you'll stay tuned to the very end. Without further ado, here is the interview. Well, welcome everyone. It is great to have you with us, and I am delighted for our awesome guest here today. I met Marcia about maybe 3 or 4 years ago. We did an apologetics event, Christian event at our church, and she was one of our guest speakers, and I have really enjoyed getting to know her since then. And she is a former New Age practitioner and is now a Christian who is warning people about the dangers of the New Age. And the New Age movement is all around us, and many people have been affected by it and its teachings without even really knowing it. And so today we're gonna hear from Marcia and her testimony, her story, and just some warnings that she has for us, and how we need to be good discerners on who we listen to and who we don't listen to. So. Marcia, it is a delight to have you. Thank you so much. And without further ado, I just want to ask you to tell the viewers a little bit about yourself and how the Lord got a hold of you, and just a little bit about your story. So it's all yours.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much for having me, Pastor Brian. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I like sharing what the Lord did in my life. I was very resistant to becoming a Christian. I actually did have exposure to various churches growing up, because my mother had been raised Southern Baptist and believed in children going to church. My father was an agnostic. He wasn't sure whether there was a God or not, but he wasn't against, my sister and myself going to church. So we moved around a lot. We lived overseas much of my childhood. We went to various churches, some kind of generic. And in high school, I really got interested in other religions. And I lost a lot of interest in Christianity. To me, it was very boring. And I just didn't get it, basically. I didn't understand the point of it. And I think I saw it as a moral religion, like you have to be good kind of thing. You have to be good to get into heaven. So it was very shallow to me for whatever reason. And I had friends who were from other religions. And so I began to question, well, why should I be a Christian? I can really be anything that I want. And I also was interested in high school in astrology and the supernatural. Now, all of that in college led to me getting very interested in Eastern religions and continuing an interest in astrology and the supernatural. Of course, I couldn't do much with it in college, but I did have some paranormal experiences. And I also learned more about Eastern religions. When I got out of college, I continued these paths of interest. I would say that I rejected Christianity, consciously rejected it by the time I was 16, and maybe really starting at age 15. So after college, I did more reading. I was interested in contact with the dead. I was interested in, psychic powers, having ESP, extrasensory perception. I was reading a lot of books about that. I went to some psychics. In time, after all of this reading, I actually, for a brief time, was involved with a Tibetan Buddhist group, learning how to do Buddhist meditation. And I also took a course called Inner Light Consciousness, which really you could sum up as a crash course in the New Age. And so I learned various things there, and we had a guided meditation every evening. And at the very last night, we were told that at the end of the meditation that night, we would be introduced to our spiritual master. And we all realized the spiritual master was disembodied. And I did encounter what I thought was my spiritual master, which is really just another term for spirit guide, which is very common in the New Age and the occult. And actually, he was with me from then on. I did not like converse with him like some people do. I didn't know his name, but I was very aware of his presence. A few times he did say things to me in my dreams. Now, this is very common in the New Age and the occult. This is not unusual. And I also felt I had other spirit guides, and I was told by psychics I had a lot of spirit guides. So after that point, I took some courses. I took psychic development, and I took astrology classes. I was living in Atlanta, Georgia, and actually this kind of material and teaching was very available there. And I, at a particular place, I took these classes. I was learning astrology. I was learning to develop psychic abilities. I started having a lot of these paranormal experiences. And then I actually was licensed to practice astrology after taking a 7-hour exam. So the 7-hour exam was very difficult. Only half the people passed it. That it qualified me to purchase a business license, and I started practicing astrology professionally. I also had become interested. I had gone from Tibetan Buddhism to Zen Buddhism. And so now I was reading a lot of Zen Buddhist writings.
What's the difference between those two, by the way, just for anyone that...
Okay, yes, there is a difference, although they are both Buddhism. Buddhism started in India, and when it went up into Tibet, it got blended with an animistic indigenous religion there called Bon, B-O-N.
Okay.
An animistic shamanistic religion is a religion that believes in all kinds of spirits. Objects usually have spirits in them. There's a lot of different gods. So it kind of blended with that, which makes Tibetan Buddhism very different from Buddhism in other places. Because actually in Buddhism, there is no God. But yet in Tibetan Buddhism, they have deities because of this kind of shamanistic religion there. When Buddhism went into China, because Tibet was so isolated, that's one reason that the beliefs kind of stayed the same there. In China, it blended more a little bit with Confucianism and with Taoism. Some parts of Buddhism blended with Taoism, which is an ancient Chinese religion that is also originates in shamanism. And when that part of the Taoism and Buddhism in China went to Japan, it became Zen Buddhism. In China, it actually still exists, and it's called Chan, C-H-A-N. I may not be pronouncing it right. It may be pronounced Zhan, more like a Z. And in Japan, it's Zen. And Zen Buddhism is probably one of the major forms of Buddhism that's in this country and has influenced different groups in this country. Like the Beatniks were very taken with Zen Buddhism, for example. Or the
That's
Beat
very helpful. Thank you.
I should say the Beat generation, not the Beatniks.
Right.
Jack Kerouac,
Right,
on the road, and they were very much influenced by it. But it continued, and there's been a big swell of Zen Buddhism in this country through Alan Watts and D.T. Suzuki, who both wrote a lot of books that were very popular and are still popular. And I was influenced, in fact, by those books. And that's one way I got into Zen Buddhism. So Zen Buddhism compared to Tibetan Buddhism seems very simple because Tibetan Buddhism has a lot of rituals and a lot of things that you do, whereas Zen Buddhism focuses on what they call sitting, which is actually meditation. And they don't even like to say meditate. they kind of strip all the extra stuff off and get it down to bare bones, is one way to put it. Whereas Tibetan Buddhism has all the bells and whistles. So that's good, one way of thinking of the differences between the two.
And you drifted more toward which one now? So
towards Zen. Towards Zen, yes. It seemed to have a simplicity about it, but also it seemed very profound to me because it expresses a lot of ideas in what seemed to be paradoxes.
Okay.
So, you know, they asked, like, what is the sound of one hand clapping? I'm sure a lot of people have heard that. These are questions that are supposed to trigger a spiritual insight if you ponder it long enough. And this insight is not an insight you get through reasoning or logic. It's supposed to be an insight that goes beyond the mind and beyond the intellect, because actually in Buddhism, your mind and your intellect is in the way of your spiritual understanding. It's a barrier.
Do you find that there's a lot of postmodernism and postmodern thought kind of mixed in with this? Because it's sounding a little postmodernish, you know, to me.
Well, I think that it's compatible with a lot of postmodern views, but I don't know that I would call it postmodern, because it actually goes back before what we would call the postmodern age.
Right.
I think that it is aspects of it, especially in the United States, are compatible with it. Now, when I talk about Zen Buddhism and having been in it, I'm talking about it as a Westerner who followed it here as a New Ager, which is not quite the same as somebody in Japan who's following a very strict Zen Buddhist path as a monk, for example, maybe, or with a teacher. It's going to be it's going to be very different there, or somewhat different and more restricted. Right. In this country, because of the strong sense of individuality and freedom, when Eastern religions are adopted by Westerners, like Hinduism or Buddhism, they're often mixed with other things. And so I don't want to sound like I am an expert on Zen Buddhism. I only know how it is for Westerners in this country. Or I know a little bit about it in Japan, but I know more about it here. And so it mixes. A lot of people who take on Zen Buddhism in this country are also involved in other New Age, what I would call New Age spiritualities, like I was. So you know, I was also into astrology and spirit guides, etc.
So would you say that, you know, getting back to your story, that your focus when you were part of the New Age movement, your focus was astrology, and then you kind of had some other things kind of along the edges, or was that the description?
Astrology was not my focus initially. My interest in it was always constant, but I didn't actually start seriously taking classes until I had already done the Tibetan Buddhism, and then gotten kind of into Zen Buddhism and psychic stuff, and then I studied astrology. So astrology did become a focus after I studied it, and I got licensed to practice it legally. Then it definitely was a focus, and at that point, the Zen Buddhist meditation, I still did it every day, and I still was into a lot of New Age things, but they were definitely not my focus as the same way astrology was, because I had clients, you know, so I was actually seeing people and getting paid for interpreting their birth chart is what I was doing.
So for the uninitiated, can you give us like a 60-second or overview, if that's possible, on what is astrology? You know what?
Yes, that's good. That's good that you asked that, because a lot of people mix it up with astronomy.
Right, yeah.
And of course, astronomy is the scientific study of space and the heavenly bodies.
Right.
And so you're studying data.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with astrology, you are looking at some of that data, like you're looking at the sun and the moon and the planets and their position relative to Earth. But astrology gives a meaning to it. So there's, you know, astronomers don't look at Mars and think that Mars in somebody's chart is going to indicate their ego or how energetic they are. You know, they don't give a personal meaning to it. But astrology will look at the person's birth chart and interpret the sun a certain way. They'll interpret Mars, and depending on the zodiac sign it's in. So if your Mars is in Sagittarius, it's very, very different than if your Mars is in Pisces, for example. So when you do a birth chart, it's the picture of where the planets were relative to the place where you were born at the time you were born. So to get an exact chart, you need a birth time.
And how does it help someone? I mean, what is the appeal of that? I mean, you know.
Well, the idea is that it shows not just who you are, it shows all your potentials for good and bad. It shows your path in life. If you're an astrologer who's into a certain kind of spirituality, like I was, then I would interpret the chart also as the spiritual path of the person. And I would give a spiritual meaning to things, which most astrologers do. And especially, of course, all the New Age gives spiritual meaning to everything. So you can't separate the two. Mm-hmm. So you're looking at it. So you're giving a psychological / spiritual picture of the person and their life. So you're looking at things like influences from childhood. What kind of relationships does this person have? Is this person drawn to domineering partners, or are they drawn to angry partners, or are they drawn to childlike partners? You know, so you go through the whole relationship thing, and you look at the job area. You know, what are your talents? Where do you do best? How can you develop your potential? It's really like the whole picture of who you are and your whole life journey. I mean, supposedly.
Is it accurate at all, or does it work? You know,
well,
I'm not endorsing it by asking that.
Right? No, definitely not. And I'm not endorsing it with my answer when I say that yes, it does seem to work. Mm-hmm. But there are reasons for that. Number one, there are many things all of us have in common because we all have human nature. Right. So. You know, there are a lot of characteristics, even though we're all different, unique people, there are a lot of characteristics that we share. Yep. You know, I think you find this out just in general conversation with people that, oh yeah, I feel that way too. You know, when you know, that my boss says that to me, that makes me feel this way. So we all have these general reactions to things. And the other there are other factors. Another factor is that the person wants to believe. Yeah. If they have asked for their chart to be done, they either already believe in it, or they think it might be true, or they're wanting to believe in it. There's a seduction process when a person is sitting there hearing about themselves. It's just very seductive. Yeah. And you're sitting there and somebody's talking about you and they're sympathetic. Yeah. And they're saying things like, you know, oh, I know this is a difficult thing in your marriage and blah, blah. You, even if you're not positive that what they're saying is correct, you tend to agree. Yeah. And you either hear what you want to hear, or you hear what the person says is like, I'll say something and it'll be correct. The person will remember that. I'll say something and it may not be so correct. They'll forget it. It's called selective memory. And then the other factor, so those are a couple of factors. The other factor is that many astrologers who are doing this seriously as a spiritual thing have, like I did, have spirit guides. Right. Now, these spirit guides are fallen angels. And I have no way to prove this, but I 100% believe they exist, and they feed information. So, because so often when I was doing a chart, something would come to my mind about the person, and I would blurt it out. It could be, I could either get a picture in my head, or I could get a word, or just some kind of sudden insight, and I would say it, and the person would say, yes, that's true, and it would be something there would be no way for me to know. So I would either kind of see it as I was doing the chart, or sometimes it would just spontaneously pop into my head.
Yeah.
And I had that happen most of the time when I was doing a person's chart.
Which is a warning that just because something works doesn't mean we as Christians should pursue it.
Exactly. Because a lot of things in the world of the occult and the New Age seem to work. And sometimes they do work. There is accuracy, because there are these fallen angels behind the scene who know information about the person and can pass it on to the astrologer or the psychic or the medium.
So I don't want to derail you from your testimony and story back to that, but this brings up a huge question. Your testimony and your claims that you're making rests on the claim that the supernatural is real, that there are such thing as angels and fallen angels, and
right.
Of course there's a lot of skeptics out there, people probably watching this interview that think we're both nuts to be talking like this, that science is all there is and it's just material universe, and and how can we be talking about angels and demons and devil and God, and it's just crazy. So based on your experience though, do you feel that there is strong evidence, both objectively and anecdotally, for spiritual reality?
Well, yes. I would certainly point, first of all, to God's Word, to the Bible, which indicates that, we know there are angels, and we know there are angels who rebelled. Mm-hmm. And we are usually unaware of this world. We know the most we know about is usually through God's Word. But Jesus certainly confirmed it. He mm-hmm. referred to Satan as a personal being.
Yeah.
And he referred to unclean spirits or to demons. Yeah. And there were several examples of him casting demons out of people. So, and the Bible also talks about in Ephesians 6 about spiritual forces at work. We see in Jude the Archangel Michael, who is Satan is having sort of, I guess, challenging Michael, and Michael says, "The Lord, rebuke you." He's having a real encounter there with Satan. So. And there are a lot of examples. So we know from God's Word, if somebody believes God's Word, then it would be very hard to reject the supernatural unless they just wanted to pick out the parts they like and leave out the parts they don't like. For people who don't believe in the Bible, I mean, of course, New Agers believe in the supernatural.
I just want to add something. This is for Christians, any Christian watching this. You've got John, the Apostle John says, test the spirits, because the devil guides himself as an angel of light. And when I'm hearing you talk about your testimony, the spirit guides or master, spiritual master, whatever, and all that. That's just John's coming to mind, because I mean the devil and his forces can masquerade as helpful, benevolent beings, and mislead a lot of people. And so just because something works does not mean that's a road we should go down. So I just want to offer
exactly. And things wouldn't be deceptive if they weren't appealing.
That's right.
If it looked evil or made you feel horrible, then you wouldn't be interested. Right. You're only interested because it's appealing or it seems good and helpful. And that's exactly how these things work. And I always tell people the New Age always appears helpful, kind, and beneficial. It always looks positive, always. Mm-hmm. And that's why it is so seductive.
In contrast to biblical Christianity, which often comes off as controversial and upsetting.
Yes.
People, they read stuff in the Bible and like, what? I don't, that doesn't fit with my lifestyle. It doesn't fit with me. And the New Age movement comes along and says, hey, and that's very seductive,
It's hey, you can believe in yourself. You can do anything. You're really good, and you have this power you're not aware of, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And then there are all these methods that they offer that seem to be helpful. And it all focuses on you. And we naturally like things to focus on us. You know, we really...
We are our favorite subject, you know.
We are our favorite subject. I mean,
Yeah.
that's one reason astrology is so popular, and it continues. Astrology sort of has a consistent popularity in this country because of that. It seems so tailored made just to be about you. And that's very seductive. So all these things are just super seductive for people.
What would you say, though, to you were about to say this and I cut you off. So what would you say to the skeptic, the atheist, you know, the
about the spiritual world?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't deal with them too much. I deal more with New Agers who already believe in the supernatural. I think it's a little easier, actually. But yeah, I don't know. To the skeptic, I don't know. I guess I would say if everything is just material, if there's nothing else but the material world, then what accounts for the way everything works? Why is it that Earth is placed in a position where if it was just a little closer to the sun, we would be burned up. If it was a little further away, we would freeze.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Everything seems to be organized, very organized. And also, I would say, if we're just material, how do you explain that we have this intellect and we're even able to be skeptics about the supernatural?
Right.
You know, when animals clearly don't go there at all, we're obviously very different from animals. So how did we come about? How, you know, to me, the origins question really is a good one, because you really can't logically explain man just evolving from animals, in my opinion. No. And you can't explain why we're so different, and you can't explain why man seems to want a spiritual answer to things, you know. And I actually think the number of atheists and skeptics is a lot lower than maybe what they want us to think. I think more people have some kind of spiritual view.
I think you're absolutely right. There's a lot of people that, in my experience, and I don't want to insult anyone that's not a believer that's watching this. It's not my intent, but a lot of people are just frustrated and disenchanted with their experience in Christianity or in the church or whatever, and so it's almost like they're just angry about that, and and so they turn to science or materialism or alternative spirituality. But I think most people, if you sat down with them, had a long enough conversation with them, will acknowledge there's got to be something beyond the material in order for this all to make sense. You're alluding to the cosmological and teleological arguments and stuff, and it's all true. But I think you're right. Most people, it really comes down to, am I going to follow God or am I going to follow my own path? You know, and the New Age movement is very appealing to people that want to follow their own path, reach their own enlightenment, expand their own awareness. So anyway, I want to get back to your story though. So you were an astrologer. You took a 7-hour exam, which is like a law degree, almost like a bar exam or something.
Yes, yeah, the bar exam for astrologers.
I don't know. I mean, people that get real estate licenses have to go to that kind of a stuff. So, and you became the head of your president of the I don't know what you call it.
The Astrological Society in Atlanta.
So tell us about that and all that.
Yeah. And before that happened, actually, I got onto the board of astrology examiners, which was set up by the city of Atlanta earlier, before I came onto the scene. And this is the exam that formulates, these are the people, the board formulates and grades the exam that's given to the people who take the test that I took. And I was on that board for 4 years, and I was chairperson the last 3 of those 4 years. Then I became president of the Astrological Society. I can't remember. I have to think about the years. I'm not sure that there might have been a year or 2 in between there. But also all this starting around 3 years, I think, or maybe 2 years after I was licensed, I started teaching astrology. And I did that on a regular basis. And I even did workshops to help people who wanted to take the exam to help them prepare for the exam. So, because I knew the kind of things you had to know, and I would teach. We would go through. You have to be able to calculate the chart. You have to have memorized the mathematical formulas. So part of it is all math, and then you have to.
Well with that then. So
No, well, I'm terrible in math. That's the funny thing, is that math was my worst subject. I'm still not good at math. I'm terrible. I have to use the calculator on my phone all the time. I am really bad at math, and I struggled in school, but I really wanted to learn astrology so badly. I learned how to do the formulas. And then the other part, of course, is interpreting. So we would do a lot of charts, and we would talk about interpreting them. So I was teaching very heavily and doing, having clients see me, consulting me. And there's not just the birth chart, there's also relationship charts. And then people would come to me every year to get their chart updated. And I would look at where the position of the planets now, you look at the position of the planets now and over the next several months compared to the birth chart. And so you update the chart as to what's going on. So that's another thing you do in astrology. There's lots of things that you can do with it. Some people use it for finances.
I just find that irony that I don't know if people are seeing, but the appeal of getting into the New Age is this freedom. I can be my own God, basically. What it comes down to. I can go my own way, go my own path, and yet the whole premise of astrology is that your life is governed by these forces that are outside of your control, like the position of the stars and the planets and everything. It's just, I find it very ironic, so I just.
Well, they don't actually, my contemporary astrology wouldn't put it that way. They wouldn't say we're governed by the stars.
Okay, right.
This is an idea that this is when astrology was very fatalistic.
Okay.
That idea probably existed before the late 1800s, early 20th century, because when psychology came along, it changed everything. Okay. Psychology influenced astrology tremendously and really changed it. It didn't change the basic meanings of the planets and the zodiac signs, but it gave this kind of new additional ways to interpret. Okay. So actually, the way I would explain it to people, because I had a few people say that to me who were skeptics, like, oh, do you really think that the planets, influence your life or something like that? And the way the astrologer sees it is that the position of the planets at your birth represent your life. They don't exert an influence on you. They represent something. And the potential is there for good or bad. So it's really up to you as to how you use those energies as I used to put it. Like if I see this planet in your seventh house of relationships, whatever the planet, let's say Neptune, which is a planet of deception. I could say, all right, a bad way you would use this would be you would be drawn to people who deceive you all the time, who cheat on you. But a good way would be that you could be drawn to a creative person and have a very creative kind of relationship, and you just have to be careful and not be drawn. This is a very broad example, but it's the first thing that popped into my head. So it's always given to you that you have a choice on how to use these planetary energies.
I see. Okay, that helps. But man, this field seems ripe for manipulation and exploitation,
Oh, it could be. Yeah. If you wanted to use it that way, yes, you could. I wanted to help people. I genuinely, I had one time wanted to be a social worker when I first entered college. So I really had this desire to help people. And I saw this as a way to help people understand who they were and how to live their life better and how to follow their spiritual path. That's really how I saw it. Yeah, if you were a kind of person who wanted to use it to manipulate someone or to pass on your own ideas to them, you could do that if you wanted to.
Well, let's
It's a
get back to the
perfect,
testimony. So
yeah.
it's a cool story. So
Okay.
what led
Yes.
you to Christ then?
So I was very involved in this world and totally hostile to Christianity. And then I started to get this compulsion to go to a church, which was very strange to me. Compulsion is the only, I don't know if it's the right word, but it's the only word I can think of to describe it.
Mhm.
And I was noticing churches like all the time. And I had this kind of curiosity about what was going on in the churches. I mean, any church, not any particular church. Um, and it really kind of just stayed with me. It wouldn't go away. And it got stronger and stronger. And I mean, this went on for several months.
Mm.
And finally, after I attended an astrological New Age conference in Oregon, where I spoke and I did some workshops and I was on a panel, I came back to Atlanta and I decided that I would go to a church because I felt that this compulsion, there had to be an explanation for it. And my explanation for it was that it was coming from a past life. Now, I believed in reincarnation, which I forgot to mention. And I believed that, you know, when we died, we would come back as another person. But it would be the same soul. And you would continue doing that, you know, and then in time, supposedly, you spiritually evolve. Of course, that's according to the New Age idea of what spiritual evolving means. So I thought it was probably from a past life or maybe several past lives as a Christian. And so I thought that I could go and something would be revealed to me. I would have some kind of insight, or I needed to, I felt like there was something I needed to understand that I was missing. So I went to this church. I picked a large church in downtown, kind of downtown Atlanta. It was sort of on the edge of downtown. And I actually sat in the car for like 15 minutes. I felt very strange about the whole thing. And then I went into the church and I sat in the back at the end, you know, so that I sat right on the aisle seat so that I could leave real easily, because my plan was to stay for about 15 or 20 minutes and then just leave. That was my plan. So the service started and everyone stood up and there was a procession from the back of the church. And there was a young boy carrying a cross, you know, or probably maybe a young teenage boy carrying a cross. And as he walked by me, I had this really strange thing happen to me. I felt this, what I call a waterfall of love, falling on me from above. It was very, very real and very powerful. I knew that it didn't have anything to do with the people in the church or with the music. I knew that, or it seemed to me that it was coming from a personal God who was telling me he loved me. And which this is all very strange because I didn't really believe in a personal God. The New Age God is more or less, is more of a force or a power or an energy. But yet this seemed very personal to me. And I actually was moved to tears. And so then I ended up staying for the whole service. So I stayed for the service and I went home. I wasn't sure how to process this. I wrote about it in this little journal I had, and I said, well, whatever this means, I am not going to stray from my spiritual path. And that was my conclusion for that.
God.
Well, I was pretty strong, or I still am strong-willed, which is not always a good trait. And so I decided to go back to the church the following week, and I continued going there. I was very comfortable there. It was a very open-minded Episcopalian church. And no offense to anybody who's Episcopalian, but this was a very open-minded church. So I just sort of felt comfortable because nobody was really, didn't seem like they would say anything to me about what I did, you know, as an astrologer. And in fact, a few people asked for my business card. So I thought, you know, I can probably get some clients. I've got a shift in my chair. Sorry about this. So I thought, well, you know, I'll just keep going and see what happens. I was sort of curious. And I actually ended up in a Sunday school called What Episcopalians Believe. And I would often share my views. Like I would say, well, you know, in Tibetan Buddhism, they believe that when you die, you experience all your karma immediately, and then it's all burned off. And, you know, people would kind of look at me and smile. And not, you know, Episcopalians are very polite. And they would kind of smile and nod like, oh, isn't that interesting? So I thought I was sharing these spiritual gems with, you know, people. Well, I ended up in, also ended up in a group that was planning to be confirmed, which of course I wasn't, but I ended up in that group. And we would read this thing from the Book of Common Prayer at the end of every meeting, and it's actually a passage in Luke where the priest says, is praying over Jesus and prophesying over him, and says, mine eyes have seen thy salvation. He's speaking to Israel, saying that, you know, he has now seen the Messiah, the long-awaited Messiah. But I didn't know that. I didn't know who was talking. I didn't know what he was talking about. I didn't understand it, but there was something about that. Every time we read it, it had an effect on me. And I was thinking to myself, whose salvation is he talking about? At the same time, the words in the liturgy sometimes would get to me, like they have a liturgy where they say the Lord Jesus Christ and where they say prayers and scripture passages. And a lot of times that had an effect on me. Now, all of this is in a very compressed amount of time. I would say that after I first went to the service the first time, it was Labor Day weekend. By early October, I was getting an impression from God that he didn't like astrology. And it was very clear that he didn't like it. But I just ignored it, you know, because that was what I was doing. And then it became, within a few weeks after that, it became this impression that God wanted me to give it up. Now, I didn't hear any words. It's not like I heard God saying, give up astrology. It was just this impression. It's the only word I know for it. And it was very strong. And of course, I resisted it initially for a few weeks. And then finally, the night before Thanksgiving, I actually made a decision after talking to the rector of the parish. I made a decision to give it up. Now, I was not a Christian. I was a confused New Ager. And I thought, wow, people aren't going to believe that I'm doing this. Here at that point, I was chairperson of the curriculum committee of the Astrological Society. I had just finished being president about 6 months before that. I was still on the board because I was the past president. And I was on like 2 other committees at the Astrological Society, and I was teaching astrology, or I was scheduled to teach in January. So this happened the night before Thanksgiving. I decided that I would start reading the Bible. And I started with Matthew chapter 1, verse 1, and I just started reading a little bit every night. And I got to Matthew chapter 8 a few days before Christmas. And it was while I was reading the account in Matthew chapter 8 about Jesus on the boat and the storm at sea, and how the disciples wake him up and he rebukes the sea and the wind, and it immediately becomes quiet. And something about that account just it just grabbed me, and I kept rereading it. And while I was reading it, I suddenly saw who Jesus was. I mean, I really saw, I realized he really was who he said he was. He really was the Son of God. He really was a savior. I realized I had been separated from God my whole life. I realized that my spiritual path I had been pursuing was totally wrong and was not leading me to God. And I just, in that moment, basically gave all that up and gave my life to Christ. And that was the moment I was born again. It was a very vivid moment. I didn't use any lingo. I didn't say I repent. I didn't even say forgive me of my sins, because that was not part of my vocabulary.
Right.
But I knew that I had to trust Christ to be reconciled to God. I knew that without understanding the terminology. And then I knew I was a new person. So everything changed from that moment on. And I do need people to know that I had been working a few months part-time in the office of one of my clients, secretly giving him information on the employees based on their birth dates. And that's why he hired me there. And in that office, there was a young Christian man who had just kind of befriended me as a coworker. He knew I was an astrologer. And I found out 4 months after that, almost accidentally, that he had been praying for me with a young adult group at his church. So all that time when all those things happened, when I got the compulsion, to go to a church, and then the impression about astrology, all that time they were praying for me every time they met.
Power in prayer,
Yes, yeah. My story is very much a testimony to prayer, praying for somebody, because I did have a few people off and on in my life witness to me, but it had no effect on me whatsoever, except to make me angry. So part of it was the way they were doing it, but I don't want to blame them for it. I was very resistant. Really, it was this prayer from this young adult group at this church, and God, I assume God burdened this young man to pray for me. He never told me astrology was wrong. He never preached at me. He never, he just befriended me and would ask me questions, and he was just a nice guy. I knew he was a Christian, and he was just this very nice guy. I liked him as a friend and coworker. And so that's what happened. That's how I came out of it.
What year was this that you accepted Christ?
That day when I was reading Matthew 8, that was December 21st, 1990.
Okay.
So it was the very, very end of 1990.
Now, I want to say to our viewers that we're about to wrap up this one, but we will be back with Marcia in a week from now, and talking about psychics, and talking about whether we should communicate with the dead and what that's all about. We're going to talk a little bit about the medical medium, Anthony William, and a little bit about that. So stay tuned for that interview. But Marcia, how long have you been, you have your ministry right now that you founded, Christian Answers for the New Age. It's a fantastic resource website. I mean, the articles on there are great. I go there a lot when I need go-to information on different aspects of the New Age and how much it's influenced our culture. But can you tell the viewers a little bit about your ministry, how long you've been in that ministry, and how they can learn more about you?
Okay, sure. Thank you. Yes, I actually people started inviting me to speak actually when I was still a pretty new Christian. I didn't have the ministry then, but there was a real need. People really wanted information on the New Age. And so I started sharing my testimony and talking about the New Age. And that developed into a full-time ministry. I went full-time in 1998. I operate through a mission board, Fellowship International Mission in Allentown, Pennsylvania. So I actually operate as a supported missionary, supported by various churches and individuals. And my full-time ministry has been going since 1998, so that's 22 years now. And the goals of the ministry are to reach out to people in the New Age and the occult, and share the truth of Christ with them. And the other part of it is to educate Christians on the New Age and the occult so they can be aware of it, because it has definitely gone mainstream in our culture. And some of it is in the church. So I'm very, very busy trying. I can't even keep up with it all, honestly. I'm just one person, but I do my best with the Lord's help. And so I have my website, christiananswersfornewage.org, and I have a ministry page on Facebook called Christian Answers for the New Age.
And for the uninitiated, what is the distinction? I think I know the answer to this, but you're the expert. So what is the distinction between the New Age and the occult?
Okay, yes. They do overlap. So sometimes when I'm talking about them, I'll use the words almost interchangeably, but I do make a distinction. The New Age is a movement. It's much more spiritually oriented than the occult. It's future oriented. It's transcendent. It's always about spiritual things, and it's kind of a body versus spirit idea, almost kind of a Gnostic thing, where the body and the material world are reflections or manifestations of the spiritual. That's really, so the material takes a secondary status, and the spirit is, and you're always on a spiritual path in some way. And the idea is that there has to be an awakening to the fact that you're this spirit in a body, and you're on a spiritual path, and you need to awaken to the fact you need to see reality the way it really is, which is not the normal way. It's the way the New Age sees it. And they're different. Of course, there are variations with the New Age. The New Age I actually define as a network of beliefs that are based on Eastern spirituality, Gnostic beliefs, and a movement called New Thought, which is the positive thinking kind of thing. And so it's a network, and you can find people at various areas in that spectrum. The occult, I like to define really as a set of practices that are associated with certain beliefs, but the occult is very much here and now. It's more present oriented than future oriented. And even though there's a spirituality to it, it's more about the self and the power of the self in the sense of effecting a change in the world. So there's an area that really kind of covers both, and that's I'm thinking of goddess spirituality. You find in the New Age and in the occult in modern neo-paganism, like modern witchcraft. You find a goddess spirituality there and in the New Age, and there's been a lot of blurring of the lines. And you also can find, like witchcraft, I define technically as part of the occult, but you also find a lot of people in witchcraft and modern Wicca with New Age views. Like some of them may believe in reincarnation, some of them may even be into, Eastern meditation. But strictly speaking, the occult is not into these kind of things that the New Age is into, like the meditation. They're more into finding what area they can practice. So that could be tarot cards, it could be spell casting, it could be healing. The healing area is very big in both the New Age and witchcraft and the occult. And actually there's a lot of crossover there as well, because they feel that I should say one of the biggest distinctions is in the occult, it's very much nature oriented. So nature is sacred, and nature is the model for everything. The earth is sacred, and nature is the model. So if that's done in nature, then it's okay because nature does it. This happens in nature, so it's all right. And even though you find people in the New Age who are very environmentally oriented, and there's something even called deep ecology, which is like a spirituality connected to the earth. It's a little different. In the occult and neo-paganism, which there's even distinctions there, but I would be talking too long. It's more focused on, it's just more nature focused, and maybe on having various gods and goddesses, depending, not always. But the occult, let me say this before I forget. Deuteronomy 18:10-12 is a list of all the occult practices. So that's divination, sorcery, and spirit contact. So those are all practices.
That's what I was just gonna bring up, because the occult, you see that in Bible times. I mean, it's like
yes.
I think Solomon wrote Ecclesiastes, but there's some debate on that. But whoever wrote Ecclesiastes talks about there's nothing new under the sun, and you see a lot of this in the ancient world. I'm sure you've studied the ancient variations or ancient versions of what we're seeing today and stuff. Paul has an interesting passage in Romans 1 where he talks about people that worship the creation rather than the creator.
Yes.
And we see that in the New Age movement today.
Yes.
So,
and so you see crossovers between them, but then people who are, for example, who do sorcery or are really into occultic practices, their views are often different from what I would call a New Ager. Okay. So they don't have this spiritual evolvement and everything. They may have a thing about a spiritual path, but the New Age is so future oriented, and the New Age also is always positive. Whereas in the occult, they acknowledge dark and light forces.
And even to add a whole other twist to this, you got the Church of Satan, and I think a lot of Christians, and I made this mistake early on, just assume that people who are witches are Satanists, and
right.
And now they may be indirectly, because I would say they probably are indirectly, but intentionally they're not going in saying I want to worship Lucifer,
Oh no, witches think Satan was invented by Christians.
Yeah,
who don't even believe in his existence.
Yeah.
And actually, a lot of Satanists don't either.
Oh,
Satan is more of a figure that represents individuality and not accepting the norms of society, not accepting anybody's moral code. You make your own code and you live life according to how you want to live it. It's all by your will. So, Satanism, I even make a distinction between Satanism and the occult. I just put it in its own category because it's really doesn't fit with any of the other categories.
Most Satanists are just kind of, I would say, more like trolls, we use it in the social media sense,
some of them might be, the more immature ones, but I think the serious Satanists actually don't like to be noticed. They actually like to do things secretly and quietly, and they don't want to be noticed. The really serious, there's a lot of immature people and there are people who think they're Satanists who I don't think they're really Satanists. They just do it to be provocative. So it's a very tricky area to talk about because there's no standard for anything, and there's a lot of varieties,
Well, the whole New Age occult Church of Satan.
Yeah.
It's hard to get your arms
around.
Yeah,
it's very, and it shifts, it changes. So it's hard to define it and really, have real clear boundaries there. It's very difficult.
Well, I want to thank you for your time on this interview. Sure. This has been a great interview. A lot of interesting topics.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We've touched on a bunch of different things, and maybe in future interviews we can go in more in depth on some of these points.
Okay, sure.
The next one will be talking about the medical medium and the psychics and talking to the dead and all of that. We'll go in depth on that. I look forward to that. So
That's great.
Thank you for your time, Marcia, and thank you for the great work you're doing in your ministry. So
thank you so much. I appreciate it.
And thank you all for watching. God bless you, and we will talk to you later. God bless.